My name is Kaluzny. I'm the Associate Director at Illinois Green. Thanks for having me. I've been to this rodeo before, but as a passive participant in the audience, and so thanks for having me up here. And just for those of you that are not familiar, I know a lot of you in the audience, but Illinois Green Alliance is the local chapter of the U.S. Green Building Council. We've been around since 2002, but as a new name for about a year and a half with Illinois Green. So yes, this is our mission. To help buildings and communities and be local advocates. And we have an EPIC challenge, or a new strategic plan, which is to help scale carbon drawdown strategies in communities around Chicago. And one way that we are doing that is through carbon drawdown strategies locally. And so our board adopted a strategic plan a few years ago, looking at Paul Hawkins' book Drawdown, and seeing how we could engage the green building community that we've been educating for quite some time on LEED and green building best practices for the past 15 years, and how can we bring that community along and look at drawdown and bring that expertise that has been built up so much in the Chicagoland area to neighborhoods, to communities, to organizations that may not have the capacity to have accessed that information before. And so one of the programs that we are working on with that is called Efficient Chicago. It is a program that sounds very much like Energy Plan, Benny, so I'm really glad I'm following you after you just talked about that, which is basically trying to bring like a one-stop shop of energy efficiency, waste efficiency, water efficiency, looking at air quality, looking at all of the different pieces of the puzzle. And instead of having a nonprofit or community organization with an inefficient building try and find all of those different places where they can access those resources, is to bring in folks that know all of those things that exist already, many of the people in this room, as volunteers or as support or as mentors to help those buildings be more efficient. And some of the way we found access to those buildings is through energy benchmarking, which Amy's going to talk about a little bit more later, but through helping some of those buildings with benchmarking to begin with, realizing that they really didn't know that much about their building and could use a lot more help, and how they don't have the capacity necessarily to look at those things, and so how can Illinois Green volunteers and staff help provide those resources and access to that information. And so one thing that we've been doing are these energy efficiency idea exchange workshops in different neighborhoods around Chicago, where we're bringing in local experts to talk about different pieces. One of them was on financing opportunities, and PACE was focused on there. Amy's come to those as well, but really partnering with all of the organizations around Chicago and bringing them to folks instead of them having to find everybody separately. And then we have small group breakouts where it's not just us lecturing at the folks that have decided to come to these, but have small group discussions on how they can learn a little bit more about the different programs. So pick a table they want to go to, have a conversation directly with that person from ComEd or directly with that person or building engineer that's implemented that program already, ask questions, figure out how they could do it too, and leave with some resources and some new connections. And then we talked with buildings that want to take it to a next level about how they can maybe move down a path. So one, starting with energy benchmarking. Second is like, let's put it in portfolio manager, let's hook you up with a ComEd energy assessment and help you take that report and those things that you've gotten, and how do we help you walk through it and proactively help you go back and look at those things, check up 6 months later, check up a year later, and making sure that folks are still having seen value out of that or are moving forward. We're also helping, one of the frameworks we're using with that is the building program, which was started in Chicago many years ago as Operation Eagle Claw. Some of you may remember, but now is a real program that's run by South Face out of Atlanta. And we're using that framework to help buildings think through some of these best practices that happen at all buildings to make their sustainable operations more effective, and really interview them as to the different steps and where they're doing these things and where they're not, and how can we fill the gaps with volunteer help, with pointing to resources locally with different firms and also programs that exist. One example, we worked with the Chicago Urban League on this. Their building was very inefficient, and they really wanted to help us to help them figure out how to be more efficient. They were offering solar training programming at their facility, but their facility itself was not efficient at all, and so they wanted to be walking the talk a little bit more if they were going to be hosting trainings about that at their building for members of the community. And so we looked at lots of things. They had their heating and cooling on at the same time. As you might notice in lots of buildings, there was movable thermostats, 40 of them throughout the building, and it was just a giant mess. And so, but with no time to focus on it. So how can you come into a building that's providing these great resources to the community and help them be more efficient so they can save on utilities and be offering those dollars more towards their mission and their programming and less on utilities they don't have time to focus on. And I'm going to stop there because Amy's going to talk about a lot of other things that I like as well, and then we'll circle back and answer questions together. Thank you.
My name's Amy Jewell. I work for a group called the Institute for Market Transformation, or IMT for short. We're a nonprofit organization focused on improving energy efficiency in buildings. And I work on something in particular called the City Energy Project, where I'm embedded in the Chicago Mayor's office to advise and support the city on energy policy and programs. So I've been there a little over 5 years and have survived the recent transition. So I was there in the previous administration and now in the new administration, which is really exciting. And so I'm here to talk about some of the city's initiatives when it comes to energy, some of the ones that have been around for a while and some of the ones that are newer. But before I do that, I think, when there's time for a little Q&A, we can explain a little bit how these programs that Illinois Green is working on is very much related to some of the things the city is working on. We definitely try to work together and not try to reinvent the wheel or overlap, but also try to work with groups like Illinois Green to leverage their knowledge and expertise and their resources and their volunteers to help the city go even further than the city could have done alone. So we very much try to partner on these and other organizations you saw. Oops, there they go. You saw some of the logos earlier. Help us with that too. And I'll just put in a plug for Illinois Green Alliance. They are an amazing organization, lots of really cool volunteer opportunities if you're interested in that, or you can just become a member if you're not, and go to some really cool events that they hold every year.
Oh, thanks, Amy.
You're welcome. So I'm going to go through this really quickly, so we'll have a little time for questions, but this is just a little timeline of some of the work that the city has done to try to address energy efficiency. And really it comes down to the city's goals on climate. In Chicago, energy in buildings and energy use basically for our buildings and our infrastructure is about 72% of our carbon emissions. So any plan to address carbon is definitely going to have to include energy efficiency as a key strategy. So the city first laid out a climate action plan back in 2008, and there's been some new plans and commitments since then. Most recently in March, Chicago joined something called Ready for 100, which is an initiative spearheaded by the Sierra Club where cities are committing to 100% clean energy by a certain year, in our case by 2035, plus electrifying the city's transit bus fleet by 2040. So that's sort of the reason why the city cares. The benchmarking work that was done is several years old by now, so most of you have probably heard of it, so I'm going to go through this really quickly, but it requires large buildings to track their energy use and then report it once a year to the city, and then to do some additional data verification every 3 years. That information becomes public, and it all gets done online using a tool provided by the US EPA. And there's a help center. It's actually still operational. We put it in place back when this was launched, but it is still around in case there are questions. In some of our recent reports, this is last year's report showing that compliance continues to go up a little bit each year. So we're seeing more and more buildings complying with that. And overall, buildings that benchmark multiple years in a row are seeing their energy use go down. So we're seeing good results from that ordinance still. Building on that, the city is rolling out a new rating system. So that's coming out very soon in the next few weeks. And we're the first US city to do this. It's something you'll see commonly in Europe and Australia, but first time in the US. So basically every building that benchmarks will get a rating between 0 and 4 stars, and then they'll have to put it on the building in a prominent location and share it if the building is put up for sale for lease. So again, these are buildings 50,000 square feet and larger. It makes all the information easier to understand to the general public, to tenants, to people who might consider buying or leasing space in that building, et cetera. And so the rating system is based on the Energy Star system, which is already used by all these buildings anyway under the benchmarking ordinance, and the stars will be assigned based on your score. And then if you don't report at all, you're out of compliance, you get 0 out of 4 stars. If you report but you're not eligible to get that 1 to 100 Energy Star score, we will assign a rating based on your energy use per square foot, and we'll compare you to similar peer buildings across the nation. And then I wanted to talk a little bit, so those are both mandatory programs now in place for all buildings over a certain size in Chicago. There are some voluntary programs also available that I'm going to talk quickly about. Retrofit Chicago has been around since about 2012, and again, similar goals that I talked about before, but really this is a voluntary challenge program where we're really trying to get the leaders in this space to join, to accelerate their progress, and to share that progress with others. And so anyone who joins this challenge tries to save energy use by 20% or more within 5 years of joining. I know some people in this room have been involved in helping buildings work in this challenge and try to get to that 20%. When they get to the 20%, they can get an award, which is really fun and exciting. And there's other awards we give out as well for most valuable property manager, most valuable engineer, and most innovative project. So it's a way to give recognition to those who are really leading in this space. We currently have 90 buildings across the city that have joined, and this is an old map, so don't count the little red dots because there's not 90, but I need to update it. And they are mostly concentrated in the downtown, a lot of offices and hotels, but we are trying to expand that as much as we can to every neighborhood across the city. And this also has been showing great results. Overall, we have seen, and this is just showing some of the benefits of why anyone would join. In case you work in a building or you help advise a building and you're interested, talk to me about it, because we are still looking for new buildings to join all the time. But there's recognition and press releases, awards. We also do something called a quarterly engineer roundtable where the operating engineers come together, go to a building and learn what was done to retrofit that building. They do a tour and they look at the upgraded equipment with the idea that we're really sharing this knowledge amongst all the members. Overall, we've seen an average savings of 15% across those 90 buildings and an average dollar savings of over $10 million a year. And that was last year's numbers, so now, this year, our numbers are going to be even higher, we hope. The last bit I wanted to talk about was really modeled off of Retrofit Chicago, but is focused on renewable energy. So it's the same idea. It's a voluntary challenge program, but instead of working on energy efficiency, which we hope you do first, once you've done that and you've made your building extremely efficient, you can consider renewables for your building. So this is taking, I think I mentioned on an earlier slide that the city has committed to 100% renewable energy for all city-owned buildings by 2025. And so we're trying to leverage that commitment and encourage the private sector to make a similar commitment. So the goal is really to accelerate the use of renewable energy and also look at local workforce development and economic development goals the city might have. So this was launched fairly recently, a little bit less than a year ago, with 7 founding members, this new challenge. And basically members are committed to developing or supporting renewable energy for 100% of their electricity needs by 2035 or sooner for all Chicago-based operations. A really nice thing about this is you don't have to have an entire building that you're managing. If you're leasing space, you can join this, and you can then look at options like community solar or things like that to displace your electricity use with renewables. But if you're interested in that challenge as well, definitely let me know. And I think I just want to wrap up saying these are some of the benefits and things for the members. Here are all the links to those programs. We definitely want to make sure there's time for questions and answers, but looking forward to new places the city will continue to go with these programs under the new administration. So that's something that I don't have all the answers on yet, but I know that the new mayor is definitely supportive of continuing work in this area. So that's it. So questions?
I think in the Chicagoland area, getting to renewable, 100% renewable, which was the implication I'm taking away, in the near future is remote at best.
Okay, so that was the commitment the city made, and it is 100% of electricity would be clean energy by 2035. So it does not include a goal for switching off natural gas, all natural gas by 2035.
I thought you said 2025 for the City of Chicago buildings.
For City of Chicago buildings.
That's pretty ambitious.
That's very ambitious.
How many buildings is that?
Over 400.
Yeah, have they started?
Yeah. So in the early years, like in the next couple of years, I think the city is looking to purchase renewable energy credits. Hopefully, as we get closer to 2025, we'll be seeing more either on-site renewables or
So that would count?
yes, or buying into off-site renewable energy projects as well would count. So it doesn't necessarily mean that 100% of your energy is coming from solar panels on site. But there are, and we do hope to see limits on the use of the renewable energy credits in the long term. We want to see that renewable energy developed in Chicago or in Illinois at least.
This might be off topic a little bit, but where's the city on microgrids? You know, I thought that was going to be the next.
I don't think the city sees that as sort of a top priority when it comes to energy right now, but I think certainly there's interest in looking at that technology as it continues to mature.
Somewhere in the talking stage.
There are a couple of microgrid projects going on right now. I think the city is supportive of those, but you know, when it comes to energy and carbon, really it's about retrofitting our existing building stock and finding ways to encourage new investment in renewables too. So any building 50,000 square feet and greater will be rated, yeah. Yeah.
The 20% reduction, the question I had on the percentages, does that account for occupancy? Like if you're taking an empty building and you're renovating it, so you get credit for putting in a system that's 20% more efficient than a fully occupied square system.
That's a really good question. So for that 20% reduction, that's under our voluntary program, so it's, again, not required of anyone. But most of the buildings that have joined that are not vacant. But if we had a vacant building, I think we could figure out a way to look at modeling what a 20% reduction would be there.
So that's different from the STAR.
That's different. Yeah.
What's this voluntary program? Is it voluntary for buildings of every size?
It is, yeah. Oh, we've never had a single family home, but if you want to join, why not, right? If you can get to 20% or you want to try, let's throw you in there.
So you have 400 buildings, so you just one buildings. Do you have a written roadmap about how you're going to get to the goal?
That is, I believe, being created right now as we speak.
It seems like, you know, without that written roadmap, you'll never get there.
Right, I agree. I think that the initial phases of planning are happening right now. Obviously, we don't have much time left, just about 5 years. So I know there is also money in the city's budget to put towards some activities around it this year and definitely next year in 2020 and then each year until 2025.
What you see is the innovations that you're going to be able to create around
I don't know the exact route the city will take, but I know they're looking at all their options, and I think they are considering large-scale purchase into an off-site renewable energy farm as a possibility. So kind of an off-site renewable installation.
I guess what I'm trying to look for is, you know, what kind of innovations could there be that would help other people that, you know,
Right.
because that's the easy route.
Right.
Talking about.
Right, I agree. I think that I don't know all the answers to this one, and I think that this is one where we need to take a little more time and try to figure it out. But you know, part of the challenge is a lot of the city-owned buildings are older and aging, and some of them have older roofs and probably can't support a lot of solar power on those roofs. So what other solutions can we find? There is one project I know of that is in the works to try to put solar on city-owned vacant land. So ground-mounted solar on some vacant lots that are owned by the city, mostly on the south and west sides. It's a small project. It's only about 5 or 6 parcels, and I can't remember the total acreage, but not a lot. But that's one possibility that they're looking at. I know that there was a big project called Retrofit 1, and that was retrofits to 60 buildings. It was done through an ESCO arrangement. And so ESCOs tend to mostly do safe, non-risky, mostly low-hanging fruit projects. But it was fairly successful, and I know they're looking at all of those results and trying to plan Retrofit 2 now. to, but to try to get more aggressive savings through that, either through ESCO or another mechanism. So I know that they're planning on that too.
The problem with the ESCO is they've already taken on low-hanging fruit, and so now you don't have anything to pay for the
Right. John?
I just want to address the renewable energy question. And I think you're going to find some differently piloted initiatives within the sister agencies. For instance, we are already on 100% offset of our electricity.
John, where are you from?
I'm with City Colleges of Chicago. And we have 100% of our electricity use today is offset by unbundled wind RECs, which isn't the ideal long-term solution, but it's a start, and it's 100%. And we do electricity procurements in about 2-year contract terms. And so we have another opportunity coming up in another year and a half to try and get after that VPPA to go to 100%. And I think it's important to realize that it's not going to be able to be done on site entirely. And that's a math problem because there's 240 square miles in Chicago. To get 23 gigs of solar, you'd have to have 140 of those square miles covered in solar, which is just not going to happen. So Kankakee, you look at some of these outlying, kind of the outer suburbs and areas that are on existing electrical lines in the state. We're transitioning from coal right now. It's happening. They retired 13 gigs nationwide last year alone. It's going away. And so I think this is, it became kind of a fun parlor game of like, who's going to get to 100% solar, but now it's like, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
So we just have to plan on it in our procurements as a logical step and not as an aspirational goal, just as a meat and potatoes next contract.
One of the things I always wonder is how serious are code reviewers, building engineering code reviewers, taking the 2018 IECC? Because that has a big impact on how they see the benchmark.
The question is about how serious are the code reviewers in looking at, for new construction or major renovations or major rehabs, energy code compliance. Is that the question?
Yes.
And building inspectors. And I know that so the city and state have now just switched in the past couple months to the most recent energy code, IECC 2018. And I know there's going to be some trainings for all the building inspectors and plan reviewers on that code. Those trainings have not occurred yet, but it will be happening soon. So they do get trained every 3 years, which is how often the code gets updated in Illinois. And I know that there will also be training for the private sector to come to. And I also know the Department of Buildings has a program for really large developments called Developer Services. And in that program, they use consultants to do some of the plan reviews and the checks. And all of those consultants are also going to be trained on energy code. So there's plans in the works to improve that, but right now those trainings have not yet occurred just yet.
The board made a decision a few years ago to focus on Chicago for this 5-year strategic plan that we're in right now. Try and pilot some of these programs and figure out how to expand drawdown strategies and solutions and education around that locally, and then be able to replicate that and take it elsewhere. We do have some programs that we're piloting and doing them through webinars, so trying to train energy efficiency ambassadors, so people that are energy by day, like you, or people in the room, how can you be a great advocate in your community by night, at home, and sharing the same information you might know during the day, and empowering people with resources to do that and share that information in an accessible way. And so we have people participating in that program throughout the Chicagoland area. And we have a new one, Carbon Drawdown Ambassadors, that has a webinar coming up later this month. And so similarly, how can you talk about these strategies in a way that's not saying carbon drawdown, but is in saying some of the strategies and how they can impact locally. So we're trying to make a larger group of people that are advocates in their community. And then hopefully some of these programs, if we are able to get more grant money to support helping individual buildings with things, then we can expand that out further and show that the pilot works and move it beyond Chicago. Thank you.